Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be braving the snow with this collection of scary stories. Be sure to download our app available for iOS and Android by following the links at the top of the description to get lots of more extra content. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened in 2005 during Christmas vacation. I moved away for college and came back home to visit for the holidays, and spent a week in my hometown in a snowy state. On my last night there, my friend and I decided to go sledding at 3 a.m. We get in her car and both go down a few times. We're both at the top of the hill. She gets ready to go again, but I stop her. She asks what's wrong, and I tell her that I had a bad feeling. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up and I felt nervous. I told her we needed to leave now, and we drive back to my family home. We lived in a town where no one locked their doors. The crime was almost nothing, and all the neighbors knew each other. When we got back, something told me to lock all our doors. Then I checked the windows, and several were unlocked. My flight was only 4 hours away to go back to campus, and I slept for maybe 2. I wanted to see the snow and smell the fresh air, so I stepped outside. I looked at a huge pine tree we had in the front yard of our house, and always thought the way snow laid on the branches looked so beautiful, when something caught my eye. What should have been pure, fresh snow was littered in huge man-sized footprints. They wrapped around the tree and went towards the backyard. I was thinking maybe my uncle had been out there smoking or something, just trying to rationalize those prints in any way. The same feeling came back to me when we were sledding, the anxious and paranoid feeling in the pit of my stomach. I look to my left and I see a man. He's running, sprinting, staring straight at me, probably close to 300 pounds and maybe 6 foot, and for his size he was super fast. I froze in fear with the realization he's not doing a morning jog, and that I was his target. I tried to move several times, but I was almost too scared. With everything in me, I opened the front door, slammed it shut and locked it. I ran to the window and looked onto my porch to see the man standing there. He had his hand on my door. He turns his head, and I follow his gaze to a man in a white van. The guy in the van throws up his hands in a gesture to say, "Well?" The runner just threw up his hands and shook his head. The runner then walks to the van, gets in, and they drive away. My heart still pounding. I wake up my friend and make her walk around the house with me. There we find the footprints. Went to every door and window around my house. She too tried to rationalize it. But to me, I know that if they had reached me, I wouldn't be sharing this with you today. The malicious look on his face as he ran told me everything I needed to know. I'm a 31-year-old woman. This happened a few years back. I was walking from a friend's house to meet my son's father, X, at a bar we frequented in those days. It was winter, icy, and snowing with giant piles of snow all around. I was walking from a friend's house at around 9 p.m, down an alley that served as a driveway area for many houses. Not a great neighborhood, but not particularly bad either. I was wearing my apocalypse boots, waterproof, knee-high, winterproof. I usually have headphones and blaring music as I walk, but for some reason that night I decided not to. In hindsight, that was what saved me. I'm about the equivalent of 2 to 3 blocks away from the bar. There's a younger guy in his early 20s walking about 50 feet behind me. "Hey you!" I turn around. It seems he's talking to someone else. "Hey!" I look back, then continue walking. "Yeah, you! No, don't turn around, sweetheart!" I start to walk faster, as I realize he's getting closer. Ahead of me I see an SUV running, backed out of a parking spot but blocking my path. I turn around and there's another guy. The door to the SUV opens and there's a couple of guys in it looking at me. One guy gets out and stands by the open door. I turn to look at the guy behind me. Out of nowhere, about 5 more guys come out, surrounding me from a distance, slowly closing in. The realization that they were hiding behind piles of plowed snow just hit me. I realize they are just standing and watching me. A couple of them had their phones out and were recording something that was about to go down. Someone was smiling and closing in on me, trying to get me to walk to the SUV. Fight or flight kicked in, and I decided I didn't want to know what was about to happen. I wanted to catch them off guard. So instead of running forward, I bolted to the left. Thank God for those boots. I could run across the ice no problem, and ended up cutting through a few yards and made it to the bar. The guys were trying to get me into the SUV while filming, and I'm sure I wouldn't be here today had I not run that way. I'm a 21-year-old female, and this story took place when I was around 11. I remember this day clearly because it was the first time I was ever allowed to walk to school and back by myself. Up until the age of 14, I lived in what we thought was a safe place in Chautauqua County, New York. Everyone knew everyone. If you thought you could get away with something, then be prepared to have your ear abused by the time you got home. There was this one day though. It was a cold winter day, and school unfortunately was still open, so all the neighborhood kids had to walk through knee-height inches of snow just to get to school. It took me longer to leave the house as I was used to walking with my older sisters to school, since she knew the route better than me. I always used to make fun of her for being paranoid and taking different routes every day from school, but after that day, I learned that was what saved my life. As I was waiting by the door to leave, my mum came up to me and told me that I should ride with her to drop me off because my sister was too sick to go in today. Being a brat, I made a big deal about walking by myself because I was almost 12 years old, and all my friends' parents let them walk alone. She looked at me for a long while, then told me to make sure I paid attention to cars. I got hit by a car and almost died when I was 9, so the worry that showed on her face was well warranted. Hurriedly, I nodded and headed out the door to go to school. My sister didn't like to dilly-dally, so she was always in a rush to get to school early, but seeing as it was just me, I thought it would be a good idea to take my time. I would play in the brown slush that was left on the side of the road, and even make funny-looking snowballs to see how far I could throw them. Halfway to school, I noticed a white van following behind me. Being the playful child I was, if I had not been bending down to make another snowball, I wouldn't have noticed it slowly creeping up the street. I told myself I was being stupid, but continued more hurriedly to school. Once I got to school, I took a quick glance over my shoulder and saw the van a few feet behind me. It wasn't until I was on school grounds that it drove away fast by me. I thought that would be the end of it, but throughout the day when I would stare out the window, the van would be there. I assumed that it never really left, just parked. Many adults would try to convince me years later that maybe it wasn't the same one, but I knew it was. The van had a bright yellow smile emoji sticker on it. I couldn't see who was in the van, but through the tinted glass I knew they could see me. It was now the end of the day, and I wasn't ready to go home. It was too late to call my mum because she was at work and my sister was at home sick. I had to suck it up and start walking. I tried to blend in with a group of kids, but most of them were car riders, and the others didn't live near me. Remembering what my sister told me, I took another route home. I didn't memorize this route clearly, but I decided anything was better than being spotted by the van. I made it to my main street, but realized my mistake too late. The route I took led back to the main street where I walked to school. Hidden behind a row of cars was the white van with the smiley sticker emoji. I tried to stay calm and walk past, but once I heard the van door slightly open, I ran. I could hear the rush of 2 pairs of heavy footfalls behind me. They were getting closer, so I did what any normal kid would do. I cut corners. I cut into someone's backyard until I was directly in sight of my house and forced myself into the thick snow to make it to the door. My heart was racing, not because I was running, but because I could still hear them behind me. I made it to the door and banged with all my might until someone came to the door. My sister looked confused, but one look at my face and she pulled me inside and locked the doors. The van was still outside. Truthfully, it stayed out there until my brother got home. Me and my sister don't talk about it, but we both knew how close it was for me to go missing. I hadn't thought about this incident in years, but one of my hometown friends showed me an article that came out in 2013. Apparently some men kidnapped and sexually assaulted a girl my age. It wouldn't have scared me if I hadn't mentioned the white van. Whoever you are that attempted to kidnap me, and do God knows what else, let's not meet. My siblings and I went on a ghost tour in Naperville, Illinois, from 8 to 10 p.m., November 1st, 2019. It was drizzling and around 35 degrees Fahrenheit. There was also leftover snow on the ground from the 3 inches we got the day before. This was my first tour where EMF detectors got provided for us. The detectors were the Ghost Meter brand. The detectors beeped and flashed, and I had my detector on at full volume the whole time. We got some beeps and blips throughout the tour, but it didn't get interesting until we arrived at the exact spot of the 1946 Naperville train disaster. The disaster left 45 dead when an 80-mile-an-hour train rear-ended a stationary one. We were walking up the street where the public lined up the corpses and put body parts like puzzle pieces back together. All at once, everyone's detectors started going off when we were halfway down the block. Then our guide comes up to me, and the conversation goes as follows. If someone's here, can you make this beep slower? And my detector beeps slow down. I say, can you make it stop? It stops. Everyone's detectors were still going on but mine. The detector still read a 2. The guide asks, are you a World War II soldier? And the beeping started up again. When I ask, would you be surprised to know that the year is 2019? And the beeping stops abruptly. Then I ask again, were you on the train? The beeping starts again. We're sorry you died on the train. The guide then goes, you can go now, head to the light. Then all the detectors stopped, and the reading went down to 0. We all sat there in shock for a good 15 seconds. We might have just helped a spirit move on. I've always been interested in the paranormal, but have never been a full believer in ghosts. Being there and having this happen to me on my EMF has definitely made me think different now. Queen Anne Hill in Seattle is so steep on the south end of it seems like about 40 degrees, that if there is any snow or ice on it, that section of road is closed and buses do not even attempt to service the area. You can still access it from the north end though. Well, one winter's day, with snow laying several inches thick on the ground, a young woman took her baby to the bus stop. Her mother was in the hospital and she wanted to visit her. She had moved there recently and was not yet aware the bus was not coming. In the cold with no one walking by, she slipped into hypothermia and drifted mentally. Her baby cried and cried, and she was unable to rouse herself or even realize anything was wrong. Buses, after all, always seem to be taking a long time to get to your stop when you're waiting. Then a car appeared in front of her. A man and a woman got out of the car and asked her what she was doing there. She explained about her mother and how they explained about the bus. They got her and the baby into the car, put a blanket over them and got them to the nearest hospital. My brother and his wife had to visit someone on QA Hill for business. They heard a baby crying when they got out of the car and presumed someone had a desperate need to get to the store for something. When they came back out about 15 to 20 minutes later though, and still heard those cries, they decided to investigate. They probably saved 2 lives, 3, if hearing of their deaths had impacted the grandma's health. I suppose sometimes you get to be the angel. This is something that has been happening for years in my family. It all started many years ago, maybe 2011, when me, my mum and my brother were outside shoveling snow. We're all focused on what we're doing because we wanted to finish quickly before Dad got home. So we're all in the driveway when suddenly a blue light anomaly appears. The light came from behind me. It did not cast my shadow, none at all for that matter. It was pitch black outside in February, and there were no nearby streetlights. The only light source came from the spotlights from our house, which stood no further than 20 meters, and the spotlights were not blue and could not shine very brightly. They also were in front of me and pointed to the ground. My first reaction was to look behind me, and there was nothing. All I see is snow falling in the black sky. I look at my mum and she's already looking at me like, "Did you see that?" My brother at this point turns around and says, "I saw it too." We tried to figure out what created the blue light. We listened for cars and watched for headlights, but you couldn't hear any vehicle or helicopter. We speculated about police looking for someone with a chopper. Our neighbors weren't home. We live in the woods, and rarely are other people seen in this neighborhood that don't live here. What gives me the goosebumps is the light just appeared in an instant and was gone. We had just enough time to react and then it vanished. To this day, it's the only time in my life I can't come up with an explanation. I was 13 when the light appeared for the first time. I'm 21 now, and it's been with me growing up. Every now and then at the corner of my eye when it's dark, a blue light will appear somewhere, but it's not often. It just comes and goes. Basically flickers to life and goes away. And I know I'm not imagining it, because someone else saw it too. My mum and brother also experience it from time to time. I certainly believe in the paranormal to some extent because of it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what this phantom light that appeared in the snow could be. A few years ago, my parents and I had moved out to the Maritimes. My parents were retiring, and I was done with high school. Our house is situated at the very center of, and I mean literally the center of, a village. There are 20 people in this place at most. The house is 300 feet from the road and has forests surrounding it, except the front, which are fields that border the driveway. The year we moved in, I ended up moving away to Ottawa for school. The same year I went back home for Christmas between semesters. I'm your typical night owl, and my parents hate it. They were bugging me about sleeping in so much because they hadn't seen me in months, and I was sleeping away all our time together. That night I stayed up until sunrise, hoping to fix my sleep cycle. It was about 5:45 a.m. when the dog woke up and came into my room. She rested her head on my lap, and so I knew she wanted out. I went downstairs, made myself a tea, and then put a coat on. For whatever reason, that winter it didn't snow much, and this particular day it had snowed around 2 a.m. I remember because I went to the bathroom and got excited when I saw it falling. I put my coat on and headed out with my dog. Usually she bolts out the door, she's insane, and does laps around the house at full gallop. But this day she didn't. Instead she put her nose to the ground and trotted around the house. I thought it was weird, so I followed her. And that was when I noticed the footsteps. My parents' property has 3 buildings on it, a 2-door garage, a workshop, and the house itself. The driveway runs from the road and sort of pulls, connecting all 3 buildings, and it makes an L shape. The snow that had fallen was only 2 centimeters or so, and so I noticed running from the forest from the bottom right of the L behind the house a set of footprints, and I was extremely curious, so I followed them. They literally came out the forest and ran around behind my house, where they stopped at a window. I lined my feet up and found myself looking in the window. Then the prints turned 90 degrees and vanished into the forest. That's when I realized the snow had fallen around 2 a.m. So whoever had left the prints must have come after that, and while I assume most of the world is dark between 2 and 5:45 a.m., so either the guy was wandering the woods at night, or they had wandered up when the sun came up, also known as the last 40 minutes or so. So I shouted for my dog and we hustled inside. I told my dad, and he told me he left the prints, which is BS because I was up all night and heard him snoring. Thanks for trying to calm my nerves anyway though, Dad. This is a story my dad shared with me when he worked as a trucker. It always haunts him, and he doesn't like to share it often, but here it is. This must have happened at least 50 years ago. He was a truck driver and was doing a big shipment up to somewhere in the north of the country. I can't remember where. He told me that just as he was finishing his trip, it started to snow. It was coming down light and there was no need for grit or anything like that. When he was nearly reaching his destination, he noticed a homeless man on the side of the road. He was there wrapped in a blanket, cup in hand, asking for change. Obviously driving a vehicle, there was no way for my dad to stop, but he registered the man and carried on driving. He got to his destination, unloaded, and had a few hours left, so he thought he'd start making his way back and would stop at a rest stop in order to get some sleep before finishing the journey and going home. On his way back, the snow was starting to get deep, and the temperature plummeting. He's driving really slow and decides to pull up early and get a rest at a far closer rest stop, not doing anywhere near the distance he wanted to achieve, but there wasn't much he could do about it now. Right as he pulls in, he tucks up and goes to sleep. The next morning, the snow hasn't really stopped. It's pretty bad, and he wonders if the roads are clear. He looks over and sees that cars are circulating, albeit very slowly. So he starts making his way, going as slow as he can, and makes his way out of the rest stop. The way he has to take back goes through a small village, which is, coincidentally, the place where he saw the guy asking for change. Right as he's going through the village, he notices a small crowd of people gathered around someone. Obviously, being at an elevation, he sees right away that it's the homeless person he saw yesterday and wonders why they're all giving him stuff. Maybe they want to give him blankets. But when he takes a better look, he sees that the man had stayed out all night and appears to have frozen in the night. They were prodding him, and he was not responding in any way. My dad says that he remembers the look in the eyes of the man, glazed over and gone from this world. After stopping for a second to see the man like that, he carried on driving. He knew where the man had gone. No one around him could be help for him anymore, and he carried on with the journey. He never does like talking about it, and he always feels bad for not helping that poor soul. He said that there was more than enough room and that he could have saved someone, but over the years we've had to convince him not to live with the guilt. Who would have known that would have happened in the end? This happened to me almost 20 years ago, when my boyfriend wanted to propose in the most romantic way possible at the time. He wanted to propose to me in a beautiful field of snow while camping. Romantic, right? Well, that's exactly what he tried to do, but it didn't quite work out, and you're about to find out why. You see, I was never really into the idea of snow camping. I liked camping. We went camping a lot. We were both very outdoorsy people. But then, when he suddenly comes out of the blue, when we hadn't been camping for months, at the start of winter, that he'd like to go camping, I'm reluctant. You see, our camping gear wasn't really designed for the snow, nor had we ever been snow camping, and after reading up on it, it definitely looked like a lot more effort than it was worth, and I said to him I wasn't really sure about it. But he pulled at my heartstrings and insisted that it was going to be so nice and romantic and that we'll have the most amazing time, and in the end I said okay. we could go for a weekend. According to him, that would be all we needed, and we packed up all of our regular camping stuff into the back of the car. I asked him if we needed anything special for snow camping, and he said that he had bought a special sheet to put over the tent, as well as better insulated sleeping bags. Great. You know what? I trusted his judgment, and I thought it would be fun. So we went off in the car, drove the 3 hours or so it took to get there, and started doing the hike to get to where our camping spot would be. It's a lot harder hiking in snow, I'm going to tell you that. And although it wasn't snowing very hard, it definitely made everything feel a lot more challenging, at least to me. Everything felt heavier, I felt slower, and generally more uncomfortable. But when we finally made it to the small clearing where we were going to be camping, he found a spot and cleared away the snow. We explored the area, and it was relatively uninteresting. It was a bit uphill, but it was a nice flat area. Now I need to point out that at this part that we were on, if you wanted to go down, it would be a decline in most directions, and there was one specific part that looked especially dangerous. I don't want to say sheer as in cliff, but if you were to fall down it, you weren't going to have a good time. We prepared the area and started to have some dinner and pleasant conversation. The sun was starting to go down, and I was already feeling quite exhausted from the day, so we set up the tent, put the sleeping bags in, and just start winding down. We're talking for a little while, and he tells me how he has a big surprise for me tomorrow. We'd already been together for a while at this point, and I'm gonna be honest, I was expecting my ring, and was really hoping this is what he meant. As a little funny story, he had actually got down at one point a few months before to tie up his shoe, and I jumped up in glee before he could do anything and said, "Oh my god, yes," and he said, "I was just tying up my shoe." And I felt like the biggest shoe in the world. But that isn't part of the story really. I was just expectant. So I went to bed all gleeful and happy, thinking that tomorrow was going to be the day. About time too. And one thing about me is that I sleep like a log. A dead log that's decayed in a swamp for years. Seriously, when I'm asleep, there's nothing that will wake me. Not even my alarm clock. So I pass out, and that's all I know. Just as the sun is starting to come up, I turn over to talk to my boyfriend and give him a hug, but he's not there. Weird, I thought. But then something pings the back of my mind. This isn't right. Something didn't feel right. I wasn't entirely sure what, but instantly something's telling me that this can't be right. So I groggily and begrudgingly get up because I really wanted to stay asleep. I rub my eyes, slip on my boots and look around. I start shouting my boyfriend's name, asking if he's alright, but I get no reply. And then I hear this faint whimper coming from nearby. You remember the part of the hill that I told you was quite steep to fall down? Well, what did he go and do? He decided to get up and pee over this particular part. He could have peed in any other part, but he chose to do it here. And he slipped on the snow, and he hurt himself. He hit a tree. He'd been there for about, 10 minutes or something according to him. He didn't really recall, but he was already getting pretty cold and shivery. I was nervous about hypothermia, and even though it was snowing and there was snow on the ground, I don't think it was super cold. But in any case, our trip got cancelled pretty quickly. He was insistent that we unpack the tent, even though he was already shivering, and clearly the fall had hurt him. So we slowly limp back down, and after about 4 hours make it to the car. I feed him both our energy bars that we had reserved for this day, and that we were going to go to the hospital to get him checked out. We make it there, and apparently he did have onset of hypothermia, whatever that means, and he had some bruising and stuff, so it wasn't overly that bad. But had I not woken up, and that little sense told me to get up and check on my boyfriend, I think there's a good chance things could have got a lot worse, because like I said, when I'm asleep, I'm asleep. And I'm sure no matter how hard he screamed, I don't think I would have heard a thing. Lucky for me. He actually proposed to me 1 week later, which is good. My husband is fine, thankfully. I just moved to New York back in July from Mississippi, and hadn't had any problems until January. So I go to a high school that's maybe 10 minutes driving away from my house, and I take the bus every day to and from school. Usually my mum will come to pick me up from the bus stop and take me home, and I usually only have to wait a minute or two. This day I was waiting for 10, so I called her a couple of times and she didn't answer, so I assumed that she fell asleep, like she does sometimes, and opted to walk home instead. I usually go in a straight line for 3 streets and then make a right and walk straight down from there. On this day I was wearing a tank top with a jacket on, a Batman pajama pants, and an old school style Vans. The perfect outfit for walking in the snow, right? As I'm walking straight down, I see a man who is in front of me and walking the same way as me, so I take the right turn early, because I like to be cautious when dealing with other people on the street, especially if I'm alone. So as I'm walking down and start to make the right turn, I see that the man is now walking the opposite way he was before, and is now walking towards me, which sets off some red flags in my head. This guy is probably 5'11" to 6 foot tall, wearing a black beanie, tan jacket and blue jeans, where I am a very small girl at 5'2". So I knew that if he wanted me, he could definitely have a high chance of getting exactly what he wanted. I naturally started walking faster than I already was, and turn as he probably is 10 yards away from me, and I'm walking really fast and straight down. As I'm walking for about 5 minutes, turning around to check to see if he's made the turn after me, and I didn't see him until the last time, so I turned around, and he made the turn and was walking straight for me. So I started speed running while I'm also on the verge of a panic attack, and all adrenaline has kicked in, and then so does he. I stay at the same speed for a few minutes so I don't tip him off and let him know that I can see him following me. After a few minutes I see my house and just book it to my house and turn around to see him running after me. When I finally make it into my house, I slam the door and begin to cry. That guy could have easily gotten to me if I hadn't have been careful, and who knows what the hell he would have done to my 16-year-old self. I told my mum and she was mortified. Luckily, he didn't see exactly which house I went into, because the way my neighborhood is set up, the house is covered by 2 rows of other houses, and I'm thankful that I have not seen him since. About 6 months ago, my man and I were in Seattle. There was a big snowstorm that hit then, and we were in it, homeless too. My man made a call to his ex-stepbrothers pleading for help after some guy ran our car off the road. I was left with cracked ribs and ended up losing my job because I obviously couldn't work for months. We were living in that car and saving for a place. We ended up spending our savings on hotel rooms and trying to find a room to rent. No one would accept couples at all. Most just wanted younger women. So I made a shot in the dark to call my mother's friend, who I hadn't seen in 16 years. She paid for our Amtrak from Olympia to Wenatchee. We couldn't reach our destination as we had cats. Amtrak had a 7-hour limit on animals, so his ex-stepbrother was going to pick us up in Wenatchee. Once we reached Seattle though, the snow was coming down and our train delayed. We couldn't sleep at the station, so my mama foot the bill for the cheapest hotel in the area and decided to walk as far as we could so the cab wouldn't be overly expensive. Well, St. James Street is a hill, a hell of a hill, straight up and awful for someone who's injured. We stop about halfway for a break, and this is where we see a tall, well-built man eyeing us. I immediately went on guard. I knew how he was watching us and looking at our cart. We had stolen an Amtrak cart and covered our cats with blankets and some cured them down. They looked like luggage, well-kept luggage. He kept getting closer and walking on either side of us. My brain thought, these are my babies. and I told my man we should make it to the next block, and he followed us. But I was tired, and my chest ached. We had to stop. So did he. I was done at this point. He ignored my man because I'm sure he saw me in pain and thought he could intimidate me or something. And once he was within a foot of the cart he was so fixated on, I stepped up. "Hello, can I help you with something?" I made sure to say it very loudly to grab his attention. About 5 people looked at us. His eyes met mine, and I felt the challenge in his. I turned my smile into a glare and challenged him right back, and he stepped closer to me. "I dare you to try," I growled. He wanted our stuff. He didn't know only cats were under the blankets. Doubt he would have believed that anyway. The man glared back at me and then looked at my man, then back at me. "Walk away," I said lowly at my limit. Come hell or high water, cracked rib or not, he wasn't going to touch the cart holding my fur babies. And my man came up to my side. He's skinny but strong. Makes me mad when we wrestle. He always wins. Thank the Lord this was enough for the guy to finally look around at the few bystanders watching the ordeal go down, and after a few more seconds just turned and began walking away. We called a cab the moment he was out of sight. This happened only about 10 minutes after we'd left, and I knew he was trying to rob us. Must have looked like easy targets, and I was hurt and it showed. And the look in his eyes confirmed everything, the intent to hurt. But I honestly would have risked hurting myself further to protect my man and cats. I knew my man could handle this, but that's not who I am. Fear is felt initially, but I push it away. I can be scared after I'm safe. I would have become that guy's worst nightmare had he taken one more step. This happened when I was around 6 or 7. We were going out with the family, my mother, father, older sister. There was snow outside on that day. It had already settled 4 to 6 centimeters at least on the ground. The car windows were foggy. Here's where it starts. Everyone was almost done and ready to get into the car, but I was already done, so I pressed the car key and got in. I got into the back seat. When I looked at the window, I saw a handprint at the window in the inside of the car. First I thought, okay, nothing special. I was 6 or 7, so what should I think about it? But then I looked more at it and noticed it had an extra joint. I counted them. The reason was because their fingers were extremely long. Then I saw my family coming, and for some reason thought it best to wipe the handprint off. They never saw it, and I never spoke of it. I'm coming up to 19 and it happened 10 years ago, but the more I think about it, the weirder it gets. One, it was a fresh handprint on a foggy window, on the inside of a car, and no one had got in yet. I was the first person, and I checked the car and couldn't find anything or anyone. Who the hell could have done it? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. Please don't forget to download our app, available on iOS and Android, and leave it a review because that would mean the world to me, along with your comments. So, if you'd like to hear more of this topic, please do let me know. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you to my members and patrons whose names are on screen, who really help keep the channel running, and your support is invaluable. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap things up here though, before it gets too cold. If you want to see another video, links on screen now, maybe check one of those out, but if not, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.